The rain was coming down hard enough to erase the city. Streetlights flickered through the water like blurred halos, sirens reflecting off the wet pavement in violent flashes of red and blue. The kind of night where small decisions turned into career-ending mistakes. And Officer Daniel Harper had just made one. "Hands where I can see them!" he barked, grabbing the young man by the collar of his suit jacket and shoving him against the side of a black sedan. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was assuming the quiet man didn't belong here. And the third mistake, he didn't realize half the street was about to start recording. The young man didn't fight back, didn't argue, didn't even raise his voice. He just stood there in the rain, calm, composed, one hand loosely adjusting the cuff of his sleeve as the officer's fist tightened in his collar. But what Officer Harper didn't know, what nobody on that street knew yet, was that this stop wasn't just another arrest. This stop was about to trigger a federal investigation that had already been quietly unfolding across 3 cities. And tonight, this officer had just stepped directly into it. It's funny to think about where people are listening from right now. Maybe it's late at night where you are. Maybe the sun is just coming up. Every now and then, I look through the comments and see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy stories like this one, make sure this channel doesn't disappear from your feed. Because the next story might be the one you don't want to miss. Because we're not creating a single story. We're building a world. And tonight's story started with a traffic stop that should have lasted 30 seconds. But instead, it lasted 6 years. The rain dripped off the officer's hat brim as he leaned closer. "I asked you a question," Harper snapped. "Why are you parked here?" The young man finally spoke. His voice was calm, low. "Waiting." That was it. Just one word. Waiting. Harper scoffed. "Waiting for what? A robbery?" A couple across the street slowed their pace, sensing the tension. A man under an awning lifted his phone. The young man glanced briefly toward the flashing lights reflecting off the windows of the surrounding buildings. Then, he looked back at the officer. "For someone," he said simply. Harper laughed. "Yeah? Who?" The young man didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation, that quiet pause, lit something ugly inside the officer. Because arrogance doesn't like silence. Arrogance interprets silence as disrespect. Harper shoved him harder into the car. "I'm talking to you." But the young man still didn't react. No anger, no panic, just patience. And that made it worse. "What's your name?" Harper demanded. "Adrian Cole." Harper paused for half a second. The name meant nothing to him. But a detective watching the body cam footage later would replay that moment 3 times. Because the name Adrian Cole had quietly appeared in 3 sealed federal reports over the past 8 months. But Harper didn't know that. Not yet. "Step away from the vehicle," Harper ordered. Adrian complied without protest. Water ran down his suit jacket as he stepped back onto the sidewalk. Expensive suit. Immaculate shoes. Wrong neighborhood for a guy dressed like that. At least that's what Harper thought. "What's in the car?" the officer asked. Adrian glanced toward the vehicle. "Files." "Open it." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "I prefer not to." That was the moment everything shifted. Because in Officer Harper's world, prefer not to sounded exactly like guilty. His voice got louder. "You don't get preferences right now." Adrian's gaze stayed steady. "I understand. But I'm still declining." A second patrol car rolled up behind Harper's cruiser. Back up. 2 more officers stepped out. The street was getting attention now. Phones, whispers, rain, lights flashing across brick buildings. And in the center of it all, Adrian Cole standing perfectly still while 3 officers surrounded him. "What's your probable cause?" Adrian asked quietly. Harper blinked. "What?" "For the search," Adrian said calmly. The officers exchanged glances. Harper stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you're smarter than me?" Adrian didn't answer, but that silence again, that same calm restraint, was gasoline on a very short fuse. Harper turned to the other officers. "This guy's obstructing." Adrian finally spoke again. "I'm not obstructing anything. You are refusing lawful commands. I'm asking for legal justification." One of the backup officers shifted uncomfortably because something about the conversation didn't feel right. But Harper was already committed, and arrogance hates backing down in public, especially with phones recording. "Search the vehicle," Harper ordered. The younger officer hesitated. "Do we have—" "Search the car," Harper snapped again. Reluctantly, the officer walked toward the black sedan. Adrian didn't move, didn't protest, didn't even look worried, which, again, made Harper angrier. "What's so important in that car?" Harper said. Adrian looked at him for a long moment, rain sliding down his face. Then he answered, "Evidence." That word landed heavier than anyone expected. Harper frowned. "Evidence of what?" Adrian looked past him, down the street, at the growing cluster of people filming, then back at the officer gripping his collar. "Of a mistake," he said. Harper smirked. "You're the one making it." But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was inside the trunk, because the officer searching the car had just lifted it open, and what he saw inside didn't make sense. 3 metal briefcases, each stamped with the same small silver emblem, an eagle encircled by 13 stars. The officer frowned. Harper looked over. "What?" The officer pointed. "You might want to see this." Harper walked toward the trunk, irritation still burning in his expression. He leaned inside the open trunk, and that's when the third mistake finally became clear. Because engraved on the locks of those cases were 4 words Harper had never seen before. Federal Oversight Division. The rain suddenly felt colder. Behind him, Adrian Cole finally straightened his jacket and spoke again. "You really should have asked first." But that wasn't the moment Harper realized the danger. That realization came 10 seconds later, when 4 black SUVs turned onto the street, their headlights cutting through the rain, moving slowly, deliberately. And every officer on the block instinctively stepped back, because these weren't local vehicles. These were federal. But what nobody on that street understood yet was that those vehicles weren't responding to the scene. They were already on their way here, because this stop, this exact stop, had been predicted. And what Officer Harper didn't know was that Adrian Cole hadn't been waiting for a friend. He had been waiting for them. The first SUV stopped without screeching. No drama, no sirens, just quiet authority sliding into place. Then the second, then the third, then the fourth. The rain hammered against their black hoods as engines idled, headlights cutting sharp white tunnels through the mist. And something strange happened. Every officer on the street felt it. Not fear, something heavier. The kind of silent pressure that appears when people with more authority enter a scene. Doors opened. 4 men stepped out first. Dark coats, no visible insignia. But the posture gave it away. These weren't patrol officers. These were the kind of men who didn't raise their voices because they never needed to. Officer Harper felt the shift immediately. He straightened, hand resting near his belt. "Scene's under control," he said loudly as they approached, but the men didn't look at him, not even once. They walked past him, straight toward Adrian. And that's when Harper felt something tighten in his stomach. Because Adrian Cole, the man he had just shoved against a car, wasn't standing like a suspect anymore. He was standing like someone who had been expecting guests. One of the agents stepped forward, gray hair, steel eyes. He stopped in front of Adrian. "You're late," Adrian said calmly. The man checked his watch. "We're on schedule." Then he looked at the officers surrounding them. Finally, he acknowledged Harper. The look wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. "Which one of you initiated the stop?" Harper stepped forward immediately. "I did." The man studied him for a long second, rain dripping off the brim of Harper's hat. Body cam light blinking red. Crowd of phones recording. Then, the man glanced toward the open trunk of the sedan. The metal cases still sitting inside, untouched. "Did you open those?" he asked. The younger officer shook his head quickly. "No, sir." "Good." Then he reached into his coat and produced a slim black credential wallet. He flipped it open just long enough for Harper to see. Gold seal, federal authority. But the title under the seal, that's what made Harper's stomach drop. Federal Oversight Division, the same name stamped on the cases. The man closed the wallet. "I'm Director Samuel Grant." Silence swallowed the street, because nobody there had heard of that division. And yet, somehow, everyone understood instantly that it outranked them. Grant looked back at Adrian. "You okay?" Adrian nodded once. "Just wet." Grant's expression didn't change, but the tension in the air shifted again. "Good," he said. Then he turned back to Harper. "Officer, what exactly did you believe you were interrupting tonight?" Harper swallowed. "Suspicious vehicle." Grant nodded slowly. "Suspicious." He walked toward the trunk, looked down at the 3 metal cases, then back at Harper. "These cases contain sealed investigative evidence related to 3 ongoing federal corruption probes." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Phones lifted higher. Grant continued calmly. "Chain of custody on these materials is restricted to federal personnel under Section 14A of oversight jurisdiction." Harper felt the rain running down his neck. "So," Grant said quietly, "I'm going to ask you something very important." The entire street went silent. Grant stepped closer. "Did you search this vehicle?" Harper hesitated. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. And that hesitation told Grant everything. "You ordered a search," the younger officer admitted quietly. Harper shot him a look, but it was too late. Grant exhaled slowly. "All right." He turned slightly toward Adrian. "Well, that answers the question." Harper frowned. "What question?" Adrian finally spoke again, his voice still calm. "The one we were testing." That word landed like a stone in water. "Testing." Harper blinked. "What?" Grant clasped his hands behind his back. "For the past 11 months, he said, our division has been conducting a compliance integrity audit across multiple municipal police departments." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Grant continued. "We've been monitoring procedural conduct during routine stops involving federal evidence transports." Harper stared at him. "You're telling me this was a setup?" Grant shook his head. "No." Then he nodded toward the body cam blinking on Harper's chest. "This was an observation." The rain intensified. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. Harper looked from Grant to Adrian. "You people parked a car in the middle of the night with federal evidence in it." Adrian corrected him calmly. "We parked legally," Grant added quietly. "And waited." Harper's jaw tightened. "For what?" Grant looked directly into his eyes. "For someone to show us how they handle authority." Another silence fell. Then Grant gestured toward the cases. These were scheduled to be transferred to federal custody tonight. He looked back at Harper. "But now, there's something else." Harper frowned. "What do you mean?" Adrian answered this time. "Their documentation." Harper's stomach sank, because suddenly he understood. The body cam, the witnesses, the search order, the lack of probable cause. Every moment recorded, every decision preserved, and somewhere far away, someone had been waiting to see exactly what he would do. Grant spoke again. "You see, Officer Harper, this division was created after a series of irregularities." He paused. "Incidents involving local enforcement interfering with federal investigations." Adrian added quietly. 3 cities so far. Grant nodded. Now 4. Harper's heart skipped. 4? Grant looked around the street, the cameras, the flashing lights, the open trunk, the federal evidence, and finally, the officer standing soaked in the rain. Yes, he said calmly. Tonight makes 4. But that still wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what was inside the cases. Because those cases didn't just contain evidence. They contained names, corporate records, political donations, judicial communications, and buried inside those files was a pattern linking law enforcement interference with something much larger, something quieter, something far more dangerous. Adrian looked toward the watching crowd, then back to Grant. They're watching now, he said. Grant nodded slightly. Yes. Good. Harper felt the air leave his lungs. What the hell are you people investigating? Grant looked at him for a long moment. Then he answered. Influence. Harper blinked. In police departments? Grant shook his head slowly. In everything. A distant siren echoed across the city. Not coming here. Just somewhere else. But the sound carried a message, because what nobody on that street knew yet was that this moment, this stop, this mistake, this recording would quietly ignite investigations across 6 different agencies, and within 18 months, 3 judges, 2 mayors, a banking executive, and a sitting senator would all be forced to answer questions connected to the files sitting inside that trunk. But tonight, the story was still small. Just rain. Just a street. Just one officer realizing something had gone very wrong. Grant turned back toward the SUVs. Secure the cases. Agents moved immediately. Professional. Silent. One of them closed the trunk. Another carefully removed the metal briefcases. Adrian watched calmly. Then he stepped closer to Harper one last time. Not angry. Not smug. Just steady. You know what the strange thing is? Adrian said quietly. Harper didn't answer. Adrian continued. You almost did everything right. Harper looked up slowly. Almost? Adrian nodded. You stopped a car. You asked questions. You checked the vehicle. Then he paused. But you stopped asking why. The rain softened slightly. Adrian adjusted his cuff again. Authority works best when it questions itself, he said. Then he stepped away and followed the agents toward the SUVs. Harper stood frozen, the street still filming, the lights still flashing. But what he didn't know, what nobody there could see yet, was that tonight's footage would become required viewing inside training rooms across multiple departments, because it showed something simple, something dangerous, how quickly authority can become arrogance, and how quietly that arrogance can expose something much bigger. But the strangest part? This wasn't even the investigation Adrian Cole had been assigned to. No. His real assignment was waiting in another city, another department, another quiet street, where someone else was about to make the exact same mistake. The rain finally began to fade. Not completely. Just enough that the siren lights reflected more clearly across the pavement. Red, blue, red again. Officer Harper stood in the middle of the street while the black SUVs prepared to leave. No one was speaking to him anymore. The agents moved with quiet precision. One secured the cases. Another closed the trunk of Adrian's sedan. A third spoke briefly into a radio. And Adrian Cole, he stood near the second SUV, adjusting his cufflinks as if the entire situation had been nothing more than a delay. But that wasn't the moment things collapsed. No. That moment came when Harper's radio crackled. Dispatch to Unit 417. Harper grabbed the mic. Go ahead. There was a pause on the line, not the usual quick response. Something slower, measured. Unit 417, stand by. Harper frowned. Dispatch never sounded like that. Then, The voice returned. Officer Harper, you are requested to remain on scene until federal representatives complete their review. His stomach dropped. Review of what? No answer. Just static. Because what Harper didn't know was that someone inside dispatch had just received a phone call from a federal liaison, and the moment that call ended, 3 supervisors had been notified, 2 attorneys had been alerted, and 1 internal affairs investigator had already started driving toward the scene. But that wasn't the real shift. The real shift happened on the sidewalk. A man in a gray jacket stepped forward from the watching crowd. He had been filming the entire time, not excited, not shouting, just recording quietly. Grant noticed him immediately. "Sir," Grant said calmly, "would you mind holding on to that footage?" The man lowered his phone slightly. "Why?" Grant answered without hesitation. "Because we'll be requesting it." The man nodded. "No problem." Grant gave a small, appreciative nod, then turned back toward Adrian. "Ready?" Adrian glanced toward Officer Harper one last time, and something about that look unsettled Harper more than anything else that night, because there was no anger in it, no victory, just recognition, as if Adrian had seen this moment before, many times, and maybe he had. Adrian stepped toward the SUV, but just before he opened the door, Harper spoke. "Wait." Every head turned. Harper walked forward slowly, rain dripping from his sleeves. "I didn't break any laws," he said. Grant studied him carefully. "No." Harper frowned. "What?" Grant shook his head slightly. "You didn't break any laws?" That answer confused him even more. "Then what's the problem?" Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "The problem," he said calmly, "is pattern." Harper blinked. "What pattern?" Grant gestured subtly toward the body cam. "Your tone changed the moment he asked for probable cause." Harper opened his mouth, then stopped. Grant continued. "You escalated when challenged." A small pause. "You assumed guilt when you encountered resistance." Harper's jaw tightened. "That's police work." Grant tilted his head slightly. "Sometimes." Then he added quietly, "But not when the person asking questions already knows the law better than you." Harper felt heat rise in his chest. "So this was a trap?" Adrian answered softly from behind Grant. "No." Harper turned toward him. "Then what was it?" Adrian stepped forward again, rain sliding down the edge of his collar. "This," he said, "was a mirror." The street stayed silent. Phones still recording, red and blue lights still pulsing. Adrian looked around at the buildings towering above them. "You know how many departments we've visited this year?" Harper didn't respond. Adrian answered his own question. 12. Grant added quietly. 7 passed. Adrian nodded once. 3 failed quietly. Grant finished the sentence. And 1 failed loudly. They both looked at Harper. The meaning landed without another word. Harper felt the weight of the entire street pressing in on him. But something still didn't make sense. "If this is just an audit," he said slowly, "why all the secrecy?" Grant's expression shifted slightly. For the first time that night, something darker appeared in his eyes. "Because," he said quietly, "we're not only auditing police departments." A small ripple of tension passed through the agents nearby. Harper frowned. "Then what are you auditing?" Grant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the sealed cases now loaded into the SUV. Then, he said something that would later appear in several federal reports. "We're auditing power." The rain stopped completely. The city suddenly felt very quiet. Grant continued. "Over the past 5 years, several investigations have been disrupted." Adrian added, "Evidence lost." Grant, "Witnesses pressured." Adrian, "Jurisdictions interfering with one another." Grant looked directly at Harper. "And every time we traced the interference," he paused, then finished the sentence slowly. It pointed somewhere higher. Harper stared. How high? Neither man answered, because the truth was, they didn't know yet. But the files in those cases were getting close, too close for someone's comfort. Adrian opened the SUV door, then paused. There's one more thing, he said. Grant looked at him. Adrian nodded toward Harper. He deserves to know. Grant considered it, then sighed softly. Fine. Adrian turned back. The stop tonight. He gestured toward the street. Wasn't random. Harper's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded sheet of paper. He handed it to Harper. Harper unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the page, then widened. Because it wasn't a report. It wasn't a warrant. It was a list. Departments, cities, dates, and besides several of the entries, one word was written in red ink. Observed. But next to Harper's department, the word had just been added. Failed. Harper's throat tightened. This doesn't make sense. Adrian spoke quietly. It will. Harper looked up. When? Adrian stepped into the SUV. Soon. The door closed. Engines started. The 4 black SUVs pulled away slowly. No sirens, no flashing lights, just disappearing into the wet streets. And the moment they turned the corner, the silence broke. The crowd erupted in whispers, phones lowered, questions flying, but Harper wasn't hearing any of it. He was staring at the paper still in his hand. Because at the very bottom of the list, under a section labeled Active Reviews, there was one final entry. A city that hadn't been investigated yet, a city scheduled for next month, and next to it, a name, not a department, not a mayor, not a judge, a corporation, 3 words, Blackridge Holdings. Harper had never heard of it, but Adrian Cole had, Grant had, and somewhere far above city streets and patrol cars, executives inside Blackridge Holdings were already aware the oversight division was getting close. Closer than anyone realized, because the files in those cases didn't just expose corruption, they exposed a network that had quietly influenced contracts, judges, police departments, and political campaigns across multiple states. But the real problem? The oversight division still didn't know who controlled it, only that every trail, every corrupted case, every missing piece of evidence eventually pointed back to one place, Black Ridge. And tonight, because one officer lost his temper during a traffic stop, that name had just moved to the top of the investigation list, far above Harper's pay grade, far beyond the city, and far more dangerous than anyone standing on that street could imagine. Because somewhere inside Blackridge Holdings, someone had already seen the footage, someone had already heard the name Adrian Cole, and someone had just issued a quiet order. Find out who he really works for, before the oversight division finds us first.